And I'd like to start today with a story. So, a researcher friend of mine was interviewing some Slonim Chassids, and he heard them sing a wordless nigun, and he asked, "Where's this nigun come from? What is this? What's this tune?" And they answered, "This is Menucha v'Simcha, one of the names of the Shabbat Zmirot, one of the songs sung around the Sabbath table." And he said, "But I can't hear any of the words. You're just singing it with no words. It's a nigun." And they said, "That's right, but we know that it's Menucha v'Simcha." And right after that, we sing Yachsof. And then they sing this for him. They sing another nigun, again with no words. And he says to him, he says again, "What makes this Yair Sof? There's no words to it." And he says, well, and the Hasidim say, well, this is because we know it's Yair Sof because it always comes after Menucha v'Simcha. Indeed, there's a strict order. Menucha v'Simcha is always right before Yair Sof. But neither of them are sung with any words. It's just known that this nigun, this tune with no words, is the tune of Menucha v'Simcha. And so what makes it Menucha v'Simcha and not something else? We're going to talk about this. So in this lecture, we're going to explore a little bit about the Hasidic Nigunim, which are sung around the family table during the Sabbath, the Shabbat table by the Hasidim. And we're going to see how this repertoire changes when non-Hasidim bring these Nigunim into their own family repertoire of Zmirot. So I thought that perhaps we should start by hearing a nigun which is sung around the Sabbath table by the Tzanz Hasidim. The Tzanz is one of the dynasties of the Hasidim. This is a song called Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem is a piyut, it's a paraliturgical poem, the first thing which we sing after we return home from the synagogue on Friday night. And this is kind of welcoming the angels that accompany the Jew when he returns from his synagogue and he comes to home. So I'm going to share my screen with you and show you and hopefully share the sound of this nigun of Shalom Aleichem. And this, like many other of the recordings which we're going to hear, is coming from a CD, which is called the Hasidic Nigun, as sung by the Hasidim, which was published by the Jewish Music Research Center in Jerusalem. And they are a product of the fieldwork of researcher Yaakov Mazor, who dedicated much of his research to the Hasidim and to recording and learning about their Nigunim. So this is one of the Nigunim which he is brought.
Oy shulay malaychem malochay shulay malochay shures malochay yelayn mimeile malochay malochem agudoy burachi malochay shulay malochay shures malochay yoyn Mimelo malochay ameluchim avakudoy burchi.
I'm going to stop here, but of course this nigun is repeated 3 times for each of the, or even more, 4 times for each of the different strophes. And this is a good time for us to sort of try, and it's an opportunity for us to think about the stereotypes and the assumptions that we have when we talk about a Hasidic nigun. So first of all, often we think of Hasidic nigunim as something which is very sort of lively and dance-like. And here we hear a more contemplative, slow, even with a fluctuating tempo kind of nigun. And so this performance is sort of very different from sort of a happy clappy nigun simcha or nigun rikud, a happy nigun or a nigun of dance, which we know are characteristics of the nigunim of the Hasidim, and sometimes these is sort of a stereotype of the way nigunim are. But here we hear a contemplative nigun, and we know that there's an entire genre of more sort of internal thinking, timeless, free tempo nigunim. Another thing which we sometimes think of, we tend to think of Hasidic nigunim as nigunim with no words. They have maybe a yababam, tananai, yininai, non-lexical vocables, which are the way that they're sung. But in fact, many Nigunim do have words, and some of them are even particular to one text, such as this Shalom Aleichem. You wouldn't sing this Nigun of the Hasidim for Shalom Aleichem for any other text. And so this is definitely very much connected to the three musical sentences are equivalent to the repetition of every sentence 3 times and to the form of this Shalom Aleichem, and you wouldn't change it. On the other hand, you have sometimes Nigunim which are used for different texts and different contexts, but often you have words with a Nigun, and this makes it no less of a Nigun than the wordless Nigunim. Some of these songs are famous since they are written for the Zmirot Shabbat. For example, we know the very famous tune of the Admor of Mojitz, the Mojitz Hasidim's Rebbe, who wrote a famous strophe, one of the strophes of the Yaribon Olam Zmirot, the Zemer Yaribon Olam. So it's called Prokya Tanach, and this is a particular melody, a Hasidic melody, which was written for this text. And so now we know that there are Hasidic Nigunim which are used for different texts, and there are also special Hasidic Nigunim which are written for a particular text. So I thought that perhaps we would hear this. Prokya Tanach mi bumar yevata ve'apekya tamach ve'apekya tamach migo galutai dai amelch divechart mikol umahayat ay amelch divechart mikol umahayat. This is one example of one of the songs which are sung around the Sabbath table, which are particular to the Mojitz Hasidim, but it's become very popular worldwide. And now we understand that the Nigunim of the Hasidim are not only sung by the Hasids, they're often sung by non-Hasids who hear the beauty of the song and who hear the lovely connection which it has to the atmosphere of sitting around the table and making this more than just a meal, making it something of spiritual meaning. These songs, these melodies are adopted as part of the repertoire of a family repertoire of Zmirot Shabbat, which could be for non-Hasidic families as well as to Hasidic families. So another thing which we think of often, another common notion when we think of Nigunim, is that they're often sung in large communal settings. So it's famous to think of the Hasidic tish, a table in Yiddish, where the rabbi is sitting at the head of the table, and around him are many, many Hasidim, sometimes hundreds of Hasidim, and they're sitting and singing together around this festive, either Sabbath or festival or Yortzeit Tish, where there's a little bit of food and a lot of music. And so the Nigunim are often something we think of as taking place in a more communal setting. But actually, as we see in Shalom Aleichem, this could also be a tune which you sing in a more intimate, domestic sphere, something which you sing as an individual by yourself or with your close family or extended family. And there's even sometimes a small conflict when a chassid has to decide where is he going to spend his, where is he going to sing his songs? Is he going to be singing them at home and being part of the family zmirot and bring this kind of a family mealtime experience? Or will he try and finish eating very quickly and rush over to the larger communal tish with all of the other chassidim from the same dynasty and with his Rebbe? And there he will sing the Zmirot, and he will maybe even eat something, which is something left over from the rabbi, which has a spiritual significance. So in some families, in some Hasidic families, there's like a tension. Where are the songs going to be sung? Or where will the main meal be taking place? Is the father going to be, and the sons, going to be a part of the family table, Sabbath table? Or is he going to go and be part of the more communal, the larger communal table, the extended the larger community, and as a place where the Hasidic Nigunim will be sung. And especially, this is especially a dilemma in the winter. I once interviewed someone, a Hasid, who told me that in the winter, then the Rebbe's tish is often in the winter time, between Shabbat Bereshit and Shabbat Agadol, and then you start eating very, very quickly, early, very early, and you have to eat very, very quickly to rush and to make it in time to hear your favorite Nigunim sung in a large, very powerful context of a larger group of people all sing together. Now, are the songs the same? If you sing a song in your home and then you rush to the tish, is it the same repertoire? So some Hasidic families at the home, they have more of a freedom to choose a tune from their family, an ancestral tune, like something which they learned from their father or from their grandfather, something which maybe connects them to the geographic place where they originate from. And they could even choose a pop, a religious, Hasidic, neo-Hasidic pop tune, a song by Avram Fried, or by Mordechai ben David or Shweki, something which is more of a popular song to be sung around the tish, and that's also sort of more or less legitimate. Whereas when you go to the Hasidic tish with all of the Hasids and the Rebbe, and there's a Baal Menagen whose job it is to choose the songs and to further them, you have less freedom as an individual, and this tish is much more predetermined. There's often an order of songs which will be sung in the tish, and so when you go and join that, you perhaps have less of an aesthetic freedom to choose your soundtrack as an individual and to curate your own music which you'd like to sing around the Sabbath table, and you're more part of a predetermined group where you sing what the dynasty you belong to sings, so you sing what is traditional to sing on a Sabbath tish according to your dynasty. So we see that Nigunim can be sung with or without words. They can be sung around the Sabbath table in a small, intimate setting or in a larger communal setting. In fact, when we think about Nigunim, we have to perhaps broaden the way we define them. We have to think of them perhaps in a broader, even a broader way. When Hasidim are interviewed and you ask them about something they heard even in prayer, often they'll say, "Oh, he did the Rujin Nigin for the Nusach." Okay, meaning they call something which researchers would call, this is nusach, the prayer liturgical recitation. And this is a nigun, which is something completely different, it's a melody. So for Hasids, that distinction is not so much alive. And for them, anything which is sung as part of like the tradition of the dynasty, be it the liturgy of the way the synagogue of the Hasidim their tradition is, or the nigunim at home, or even nusach, or the way that the Rebbe lights the Hanukkah candles. This is done with what they call a nigun. And so we have to be aware that we're not trying to put our definition of nigun upon what actually happens in practice among the Hasidim. The Hasidim have perhaps a broader definition of what a nigun is than we as researchers sort of try and think of it. And in the end, the nigun is meant to be a musical manifestation of the individual's belief system, and it's part of the spiritual work of the individual, of the chassid. It's part of his avodat Hashem, and it means to try and become closer to the Almighty, to join Him, and to be closer to the eternal. And so this is the nigun itself, the music of the nigun. And even the words perhaps are of less meaning than the music. And we know the music itself, the wordless nigun, is also a way of expressing things which words are not able to express. And so the nigun itself is like the deepest expression of the Hasid's religious internal life, their spiritual way of life, and their way of aspiring to be closer and more spiritual manifests itself through the singing of the nigun. It's almost a vehicle to try and be closer. So according to the Hasidic world and thought, nigun is even able to change things which are wrong in the world, and both in the heavenly presentation and its earthly presentation of the world. And as far as Shabbat, singing nigunim, and even zmirot too, for that fact, is a way of elevating the table where we sit and eat. We eat chicken and we eat challah and we eat and we drink. It's able to elevate the mealtime from being just eating to something which is a spiritual, festive event which is filled with religious meaning, emphasizing how resting on the Sabbath is a means of declaring belief in a God who created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So this is so singing about these content of the Sabbath, and even just singing itself around a mealtime changes it completely from being something which could just be mundane and day to day to something which is Sabbath-like, Shabbosdic, as you'd like to say. So now that we've defined the nigunim a little bit, let's try and talk about the The Zmirot. Let's examine the Sabbath Zmirot, which are sung around the Sabbath table. So here you have a few pictures and illustrations. Most of them actually taken from, some of them from postcards and some of them illustrations of actually the Seder night. But it's a good way of thinking about the family, about sitting around a table with the white tablecloth and with the candles and with the wine. And we have to think, what are these Zmirot Shabbat? What are the Sabbath paraliturgical poems which are sung around the table at mealtimes? So this is really a unique genre in traditional Jewish music, and it's very widely practiced in Jewish homes since at least the 12th and 13th centuries until today. It's probably one of the most popular domestic music-making events in the Ashkenazi world for families, maybe apart from singing Maoz Tzur when we light the Hanukkah candles. So the texts of these poems, when they have words, and usually they have words if they're not sung by the Hasidim as a Nigun. So the texts of these sacred poems deal with the practice of keeping Shabbat and the spiritual rewards to those who uphold it. And they were mainly written by Jewish poets in medieval Spain. This is an oral tradition. So you learn it by ear. It's not written down. You don't learn it from a score. A child grows up in a home where he hears his father and his grandfather and his mother and grandmother sometimes singing these tunes and grows up singing them himself. And this is how every family curated their own individual repertories, so that the choice of Zmirot and the manner of their performance is reflecting their personal individual tastes, but it's also performing their collective communal identity, and it's connecting them either to their ancestral home, to Hungary, if they're from Hungary, where they're singing Hungarian Zmirot melodies, or it's connecting them to a community that they belong to now, and which this song is very popular in, or maybe it's even connected to the Jewish community's non-Jewish surroundings, which are adopting melodies from the area into their own sacred repertoire of Zmirot Shabbat. So is this a category? Can we say something sounds like it's a melody which you would sing for Zmirot Shabbat? Is this a musical category? Okay, we know that there are certain words, Tzur Mishelo, Yari Bon Olam, but besides being a textual category and a textual canon, is there something which we could define musically and characterize musically as something which is personal, something which is definitive of the way Zmirot would sound? So there are a variety of styles of tunes within the Ashkenazi world, which is what we're dealing with today. And it's very, very diverse. And the melodies which are sung during Sabbath mealtime are very, very diverse, and many overlap with klezmer music or with liturgical songs or vernacular songs or Hasidic Nigunim, which is what we're here to talk about. And this is all part of what we call the Ashkenazi song, which we're going to talk about later, which is that the same melody can be used for a variety of uses depending on the context. And so we're talking about musical styles of Zmirot, which can really vary immensely, and they could range from a very short, simple rhythmic melody made of a short motif. Menucha v'simcha, ol haYehudim, dim, 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 dim. Yom Shabbaton, Yom Echad, dim, 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 dim. Ay, na, 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 ya, da, da, na, 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 na. That's it. One strophe which repeats itself again and again in a very simple form. It could be very, very simple. Or it could range to longer compositional pieces which could contain a string of melodies where each strophe has its own tune. Perhaps there's a repeating chorus, but this is kind of like a rondo form. And so we have sometimes these sacred poems which are done in very complex compositions. Sometimes we also have complex soloist pieces where it's quite similar to the nusach style of the synagogue and echoing the sacred liturgical style in the home, while other melodies are derived from dance genres, and the most popular perhaps type of Zmirot is derived from dances with upbeat tempos and a regular beat. So the Hasidic dance Nigunim, which we're talking about today, are also well suited for this communal singing of a family around the Sabbath table. And by communal, I mean a family as a community. So Zmirot melodies can be slow and contemplative, like we heard before a little bit. We heard this Shalom Aleichem, which it did have a beat, but it was sung in more free tempo. And it could also be upbeat and with a regular beat. And the music of Zmirot was both sacred and also folk, because sometimes it had to do with the musical language of the non-Jewish surrounding, which the Jews were taking their melodies from. So in Poland, they were taking mazurkas and waltzes, and in Germany, they were taking vernacular German songs, German folk songs, and using them for Tzur Mishelo or for Tzama Nafshi, and very easily borrowing. And the home was a more fluid place for adopting non-Jewish music into it than the synagogue. The synagogue was a place where you wouldn't take something which you knew was sung as a German folk song, a Hungarian folk song, or Ukrainian folk song, but the home was somewhere which was more flexible and more permeable, and therefore you had sometimes local traditions of Zmirot, where the German Jews would sound different. Their Zmirot would sound different to the Polish Jews, and the Lithuanian Jews, Zmirot would sound different than Ukrainian Jews. And so it'd be interesting. It's interesting to sort of map out. You could sort of imagine a map of Zmirot, if you'd like to categorize them by locality, and each place would sound different and have sort of echoes of the non-Jewish surrounding music, but not only of that, also of the Hasidim, which are close by, also of the liturgy. Sometimes you would, these songs of the Zmirot would sort of echo the sound of the liturgy. And so what we understand is that it's basically impossible to categorize Zmirot Shabbat's melodies according to distinct musical traits, because they vary so much, both by different places and by style and by genre. So they're very diverse in form, these melodies of Zmirot. They change, they're different as far as their form, their style, their tempo, their length, their ornamentation, and their performance style. So many of them also overlapped, as we said, with klezmer music, with Hasidic Nigunim, with liturgical songs. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of the Ashkenazi song. Is there such a thing as Zmirot, or are Zmirot simply part of Ashkenazi melodies which can be used for a variety of things? So I thought that we'd take one tune and we'd try and follow it and see how it functioned differently in different contexts. So this is a tune which is sort of known, at least in Israel, it's known as Chag Purim, Chag Purim, Chag Gadol HaYehudim. But where does it originate from? Or perhaps more accurately, what else is it used for? So here we have a publication from 1910 from Berlin, of a publication called Ost und West, which was edited and arranged by Leo Vince. Very interesting. We're not going to be able to talk about it now. It comes out in Berlin, but it's interested in publishing and publicizing Eastern European and Hasidic melodies in scores. This is quite an early attempt. And so we see in 1910 in this publication a melody which is in Yiddish. It's given new words by Yoel Engel. And it's about Shabbat lights, Shabbos Licht and Shabbos Lampen, da da na 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 alai da Shabbos, soy Shabbos, oh heilige Shabbos. Okay, so we're talking about a song about Shabbat, about Shabbos, and it's the same tune as we know Chag Purim is used for. Okay, so this is a Yiddish song. It's given new words by Engel himself. It's actually a Hasidic song, which he sticks new Yiddish words to. We see this also as a Zemel for Shabbat. Menucha v'simcha ol Yehudim Yom Shabbason Yom Shabbason Yom Machmadim. So the words of the Zemel for Shabbat, Menucha v'simcha, are also stuck to this Hasidic melody. And then we see it published in Moshe Beregovsky's collection, which was published in 1962. And here it's mentioned as Freilichs, and it has no words. It's mentioned as like a klezmer tune, a klezmer melody, which could be sung. It could also be originate as a Hasidic Nigun, but here, because he's really a collector of klezmer music, it's part of this collection. So it's called Freilichs. Ya nai nai, ya nai nai, ya na na nai 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 nai, ya nai na na nai, na nai na na nai. So this is a way in which we understand. Later we see this turning into a Hebrew folk song, and it's used as something which is it's given new words relating to Purim, and it's sung as a Hasidic Nigun. So here we have, maybe in a nutshell, this notion of something called the Ashkenazi song, something which is known, which the same melody could be used as a Hasidic tune, as a klezmer tune, as a Yiddish folk song, as a zemer for Shabbat. So now we understand Zmirot Shabbat are not a separate category. They're part of this umbrella term called the Ashkenazi song, and as a Nigun, a Hasidic Nigun. So I'd like to move us on a little bit, because we're coming towards the middle end of our talk today. And I'd like to talk about how, now that we've spoken that there's an influence of the composition of Zmirot, which are meant for the Hasidic table, I'd like to talk about times when the Hasidic Nigun are taken by non-Hasidim, and what happens when there's a shift from a wordless Nigun to adding words to it, and the words would be of a Zmirot Shabbat. So the example I'd like us to look at is the Ruzhin Nigun, which is attributed to Rabbi Israel Miruzhin, the head of the Ruzhiner dynasty, known as the Ruzhiner Rebbe. And we have here a recording. As I mentioned, the recordings here are recorded by Yaakov Mazor as part of the Jewish Music Research Center's very important project, the Hasidic Nigun as sung by the Hasidim. So this is the original Hasidic Nigun. It was recorded, don't worry, not on Shabbos. It was recorded on Sukkot. And we can hear this Nigun, and we're going to give it some time. Okay, so sit back, enjoy yourself, and just listen to this Nigun, and we're going to talk about it soon. Okay, we're going to stop here. I hope you've caught on to the melody, because this is going to be important for us later. So what we're going to check is how this Ruzhin Nigun, which is sung here by the Boyane Hasidim, who are connected to the Ruzhin dynasty, and it's associated with Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin. He was the first rabbi of this Hasidic dynasty. He lived from 1795 till 1850 in the town of Ruzhin in Ukraine, what is today Ukraine. And so this tune, the way it was sung by the Hasidim, at some stage, it's adapted to the text of one of the Zmirot, one of the family songs around the Sabbath table, the text of a Zmirot poem called Deror Yikra by poet Donesh ben Nabrat. And so this entails changing certain things about this. Here we have a tune which is basically free. I mean, there is sort of a beat, but it's definitely something which is not accentuated. And the tempo itself, the length, the ornamentation, all of these things have to sort of change when you try and fit it in with words. How does this change when you try and fit it to the words of Deror Yikra levenim bat v'yintzorchem kemo bavat? And so we're going to see sort of a change over time. And here I chose a really very cute gecko lizard to show how he has to change his color. And so this Rouge Nigun, which is sung during a tish, it sort of changes to fit in the words of the Rorikra. First of all, we have a recording of kind of a midway. We have a song of Yom Shabbaton, a Nigun of Yom Shabbaton, and we hear that the second part is changed, and this second part is going to be important for when we hear how it turns into the Rorikra. So let's hear the Nigun of Yom Shabbaton. It's the same melody, the same Nigun, but now we hear it changed it's changed and shifted in its form a little bit. So let's listen to this together.
Nigun Yom Shabbosen, גרסת רב דוד קביעת. איי 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 אוי 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 ay 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 oy 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 ay 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 oy 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 ay 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 oy oy ay 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 ay, 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 ay.
Okay, so I want you to note something interesting again. Like in the beginning, in the story I began with, this Nigun has no words, but it's called Nigun Yom Shabbaton, meaning we don't hear any words being sung, but it's attributed to the words of the Shabbat song Yom Shabbaton. And interesting, we hear something which is a bit more metered, a bit more organized. Yay, 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 yay. And we hear also a second part which wasn't there before. And we're going to hear that soon later. And now we have the final stage where this song is sung with words by non-Hasids. This is the religious Zionist family, which I recorded in Jerusalem. And they sing this tune to the words of the Rorikra, and they change it a little bit. They change the melody. They make it much more square, if you could put it that way. They sort of make it more simplified. And let's hear it together.
ימצוכם כמו בבת, נעים שמכם ולא יושבת, שבו ונוחו ביום שבת, בראש נביא ואולמי, אוהות ישעשה עמי, ותסורק בתוך כרמי, ששבת בני ימי.
Okay, so here we have the religious Zionist performance of this Nigun. It doesn't sound the same way it sounded when the Hasids sang it. It sounds more like a sort of regular tune, which is more sort of in the format of a regular sort of tonal tune, and it's something which is related to the way songs are sung around the Sabbath table. So we understand that there is something which is beginning to be formatted of the way Zmirot do sound. Although it's not a separate category, there are certain expectations for the way Zmirot should sound. In different communities, it sounds different. And in the religious Zionist community, it's something which is very clear, it's very square, it has a very clear beginning and end, periodic cadence, and it has something which is very fitted to the words. The words are very important. It's important that we hear the words. Whereas for the Hasids, there are no words, even though this is something which is attributed to the words of a Nigun. Because for the Hasids, the melody is what's important. Because remember, for the Hasids, the melody is spiritual work. For the Hasids, the Nigun itself is what makes it work. You don't need the words. You know it's attributed to a certain menucha v'simcha, to yayach sof, but you don't need to sing the words to be able to have the meaning and the intent, and for it to have a spiritual work, for it to work in the world. And so it's a very different way of thinking of what a tune is supposed to do when it's sung around the Sabbath table. So this Nigun is attributed to Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin, and we know that sometimes when melodies want to be sung around the table for the Hasidim, but they're not. They don't have some special story about them. In fact, sometimes they're even adopted from some other source. They have to be attributed to an important figure. For example, this Ruzhin Nigun is actually attributed to the song that Yaakov Avinu would sing, and others again attributed to the Ruzhin Chassid, to the Admor Miruzhin, Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin, the first rabbi of this Hasidic dynasty. But we see that perhaps there's different, at least there's a parallel use as well. So this same tune,
Nigun Yom Shabbosen.
this same tune was actually used and sung by Abraham Goldfaden, who was kind of the founder of the Yiddish theater, and he wrote many musical theater pieces and many songs, which he often adopted and adapted well-known Yiddish song, well-known folk songs, and even Hasidic tunes for his he set words to these tunes. And so we have a song called Shofaro Shel Mashiach, the shofar of the Mashiach, in 1915. And we know that it's the same tune as the Hasidic melody. So now we have a Talmudic question. Is it that Abraham Goldfaden, took a Hasidic nigun, which was already familiar, and added his new words in Yiddish to it? Or could it be that the Hasids really liked this tune, but they knew that it wouldn't be acceptable to sing this, Yiddish theatrical, musical theater song in their tish, so they had to attribute it to Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin. Now, the attribution to Rabbi Yisrael Miruzhin is quite traditionally accepted. So there are reasons to think to here and there, but let's try and hear this melody when it's used in the song Shofaro Shel Mashiach from 1915, and we have a recording by Yosele Rosenblatt, and we will hear it immediately. Okay, so we've heard this interesting wandering melody, which has gone through many different changes, but we're really talking about it as one of the Hasidic tunes, which was adopted and used as one of the zmirot for the religious Zionist families, and it's really a question of what was first, the chicken or the egg. Before we end, I would just like to talk about the way the Sabbath is thought about. The Sabbath as what kind of a day are we thinking about as the Shabbat? And there are two different interesting phrases which are used in the grace after meals, the Birkat Hamazon. One is used by the Ashkenazim and one is used by the Sfaradim. And they both talk about the Shabbat as a special kind of day. The Ashkenazim say, "Harachamanu yanchilenu yom shekulo Shabbat u'mnucha lechayei ha'olamim," asking the Merciful One to grant us a day that is all Sabbath. So talking about something to do with the future to come, that one day there will be a day which is entirely Sabbath. And this is how we understand perhaps the world to come. On the other hand, the Sfaradim talk about Harachamanu yanchilenu olam shekulo Shabbat u'mnucha lechayei ha'olamim, saying that the Merciful One will grant us a world that is all Sabbath and rest for the lives, for the rest of the lives of the world. Ken lechayei ha'olamim. So the question is, are we looking for a day that is all Sabbath, or are we having a world which is all Sabbath? Are we looking towards something where the Sabbath is talking in a way to us about a time where there's no time, a time of the world to come where there's no sense of day, hour, there's no ticking of a clock. And in a way, the Zmirot Shabbat sometimes are able to convey this timelessness. And this timelessness is something which the music itself is able to talk to us, to symbolize. A Nigun, the music of a Nigun is sometimes able to symbolize or to manifest this sense of eternity, that the Sabbath is a day in which one is not restricted by the ticking of the clock, of work which needs to be done, of a timetable, and of times which need to be met. And sometimes, when we're lucky, the yearning Nigunim, the Niguneit Va'adut, have kind of a timeless aspect. And this is something which helps us while we're sitting around the Sabbath table to feel this sense of eternity, to feel the sense of how one day there will be a world which is all Sabbath, or how Sabbath is in a way a taste of the world to come, which is very different from our world. And sometimes the music is able to express this kind of sense of timelessness. So on one hand, we have these songs which are sort of free tempo, and they're bringing us into a mindset of really being free from the worldly 6 days of creation, and bring us more into the 7th day of rest, of real rest, of bring our mind to rest. On the other hand, there's also a kind of expectation of what a Zemer of Shabbat is supposed to sound like. And so we do have, in a certain way, also among the around the table, a sense of songs which are based in tempo, songs which are dance-like. And sometimes there's sort of an expectations that songs should sound aesthetically as if we're dance nigunim, they're Hasidic nigunim of dance or of simcha. And these songs are sometimes even composed for Hasidic dynasties with this in our mindset, not to have this timelessness, but actually to have the joyous aspect of Shabbos, the simcha. And so that is something which is expressed and manifested in the more upbeat, regular beat, happy Zmirot. Sometimes, even if they're dance-like Zmirot, because they're sung around the Sabbath table, they're able to sort of free us from the need to have a very clear, regular tempo, and we can be a bit more flexible because we are, after all, sitting around a table, we've just eaten, we're not hungry anymore, we have time to rest. And so we're going to hear one of these songs, which was composed by Yosef Volkvisk for the Hasidic Rabbi Dovidel of Tolna, for the Tolna Hasidim.
Yom Shabbosoin ein nishkoyach zichoy kereyach ani choyach Yoy no moto boy monoyach Meshom yanuchu yegi yechoyach Yom Shabbat soin lishkoyach ay 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 zichoy kerech ani choyach ay 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 yoyno matzovoy monoyach ay 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 vesham yanuchu yechoyach.
Okay, so we've heard this sort of, there is a fluctuation in tempo, but we can definitely hear that there's something there which is sort of dance-like, upbeat. You could bang it on a table in a way for a little while. And so even when Zmirot are composed by Hasidim, there is a sense of trying to express both the simcha, the happiness aspect, and also this rest and timeless and eternal time aspect in Zmirot Shabbat. So I'd like to thank you for being here and for listening to me and for learning with me about Zmirot and about Nigunim. And thank you very much for the hosts of the Cast Center. And there's one more thing I need to mention. I'd just like to thank Michael Lukin for his attribution of the melody of Rabbi Israel Miruzhin to the Avram Goldfaden Shofar Rosh Mashiach. So thank you, Michael, for that. Thank you very much. Over to you, Anne.
That's lovely. And I'll just add as a little plug to that Michael Lukin was the first speaker in our series, in this same series earlier this fall. So if you would like to hear him talking about the early Hasidic origins of Nigunim and the meaning within early Hasidism, you can watch that video online. Okay, in the minutes that we have remaining, I want to try to do justice to the wonderful, wonderful questions that have been submitted. First, I must say that that several questions have come in about, of course, you can probably guess, women. And I will say, in all of our talks about Nigunim, this question has come up of whether women have the opportunity to sing them, are present when they are sung. And I think it's especially present in this context, because when we hear about the Shabbat table and the domestic setting, we immediately start thinking women, and yet they're pretty absent from the story that you told us today. So I want to give you an opportunity to say whatever you can or would like to say about participation in women, either in the Shabbat table setting, the singing, or the singing of these kinds of tunes in separate female-only spheres that can help enlighten our watchers.
This is a huge, huge topic. Actually, I'm part of a project which talks about the spiritual lives of women, of religious Jewish women. And this is a 3-year project, which is very, very large and extensive. And it does talk about women only, new open spaces for women only, which have been started in the last 5 to 10 years, where you do have expressions of liturgical music, also of Nigunim for women only. But of course, what we're talking about in these settings, happening in the domestic sphere, there is a little bit more place for women to join in if there are no male visitors, which are outside of the family joining in the meal. There is an ability for women to sing. Sometimes there's even ability to bring maternal traditions of songs so the mother or the grandmother will teach something which her father sang, or something which comes from her side of the family. But generally, we need to remember this is a very male-oriented, male-dominated, dominant the family sphere, and the people who are giving the tone and choosing the music and generally leading would be the men, and they're also who you would be hearing more as far as what we hear in the family. So that's talking about the women's place.
Terrific. That's really helpful. And I think it's interesting to hear. I think it's a nice clarification that in settings, at least in some homes where there aren't people external to the immediate family, women would be participating in the family singing.
Yeah. Definitely.
Thank you. And then I'll also just say that next week we have Jeremiah Lockwood speaking in this series about some of those very recent Orthodox female manifestations of Nigun. So again, come back next week. But another question that we have is about the history of this tradition of Shabbat singing. You said very briefly that it was at least since the 12th or 13th century that this has been going on, which led some people to ask what happened in the 12th or 13th century that made this start. Do we simply not know about it from before that, or did it begin then? And I know you're not, strictly speaking, a historian, but I wonder if you can bring something to us about that.
Yes, so my PhD was about Zmirot Shabbat, so I can give a little bit of insight as to how these things came to be. We do have a very big collection which came out in 1101, which is the 12th century, the Machzor Vitri, which is the first volume where we have Zmirot written out as part of the very big year-long liturgical order, the Siddur. And so that's when we first hear of something which is more very sort of set. We do know that this singing was done probably from the 9th century. There are other sources which indicate that, but not the poems of the Zmirot as we know them. And the canon of the order of the Zmirot, which we know today, which sort of remains till today, this canonical order, started in a print from 1514 in Prague. So the second book to ever be printed in Prague in Hebrew was a book of Zmirot, and the order which was printed in the Prague print, sounds like okay, the order which was printed in the Prague print remained as part of the canon, and this order is retained until today. If you open a Zmiron or Birkon, you have very much the same order, Kol Makadesh, Menucha V'Simcha. It's something which keeps this order from 1514, which then was disseminated and publicized and became something very, very popular. So from the 16th century, it really becomes much more canonized as an order. We don't know anything about the tunes yet, but we do know the order of the texts from that time.
Yeah, like so much else in the 16th century with the rise of print, things were really set. So that sounds as though at least that 16th century canonization of a certain order and a certain set of songs sounds like it's particularly in the Ashkenazi world. We did have questions too about differentiation between these Ashkenazi traditions and Sephardi ones. Is there a separate Sephardi tradition of Zmirot that you can talk about a different historical trajectory?
So the Zmirot I'm talking about, these poems, these liturgical poems which were printed and which we see in the order, are generally an Ashkenazi tradition. At least in the beginning, we have a testimony from the 17th century that it was something which the Ashkenazim and the Italkim, the Italian Jews would do, and it wasn't so much a Sephardi or Edot HaMizrach tradition. In Edot HaMizrach, we have piyutim lechol et, like piyutim which can be sung in a wedding, they could be sung around the Sabbath table, they could be sung around the festive table, and there we do have, traditions of Rabbi Israel Najara, and we have collections, but it's not the same kind of canon of Zmirot which we have among the Ashkenazim. What we have later on are influences of this Ashkenazi tradition, which are also disseminated. This is not to say that we don't have Yemenite melodies for Dror Ikra, we don't have Sephardi melodies for many of these songs, but originally, historically, this was an Ashkenazi tradition which took hold, and it's interesting how this became sort of a worldwide Jewish custom which took on. We do have to remember that the poems themselves are written by, many of them are Spanish, the Sephardi poets. We spoke of Donash ben Labrat, so these are sort of the golden age of the Spanish Jewish poetry, and so the poems themselves are Sephardi, but the custom and the melodies historically were Ashkenazi.
And just to clarify, that's applying to this particular set of Zmirot, or that's applying to the custom of communal singing around the Shabbat table? In other words, is there a longer or a broader, a more universal custom of gathering at the meal table on Shabbat to sing songs, or is that really part of this particular Ashkenazi and then Hasidic?
So we know what we have documented, and when it's difficult to find documentations of specific events, again, this is an oral tradition. We don't necessarily know, even if it was printed in a book, was it actually sung? If we have no documentation of Ashkenazim, we do have documentation. We have rabbis saying, stop singing these melodies of the Goyim around your Shabbos table in the 17th century in Germany, in Frankfurt. So we know that among the Ashkenazim, this was a custom which was done. We have less so in the Sephardi world. We have later, 19th and 20th century documentation of these things being part of the Sephardi table and part of the musical customs of the Sephardi communities.
Wonderful. And I'll just ask one final follow-up because I know we're out of time. There was just a question just now dropped in reaction to this conversation about whether the Sephardi Zmirot are in Ladino.
I have to say I don't know enough about Ladino Zmirot. I can say that the Ashkenazi Zmirot were translated into Yiddish, and often they were sung in rhymed Yiddish, which would sometimes even fit the same melodies. And so we have the Ben Shirel, which is something which Chava Turyansky has researched extensively. So these were books published from 1600 to the 1800s in Yiddish with rhymed translations of the Zmirot in Yiddish, and we know that they were actually performed and sung. About Ladino, I have to check and get back to you.
Okay, perfect. That's actually a wonderful way to end. The research never ends and the questions never end. We'll keep going. So I want to thank you again very much. This was lovely to hear the music and to hear your teaching about it. And I want to thank everyone for coming. We had a wonderful crowd in the Zoom, and encourage you all to come back for the next few sessions and our other programs. We're always looking to share Jewish studies with more and more people. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you for the Cat Center for hosting. Very happy to have been here.